Okay, we wanted to talk a little bit about rhythm. We had talked about quite a bit about rhythm in the basic music theory videos at the beginning of this series and at the beginning on this channel. When you're looking at it on staff, it's a very simple concept. The concept is not difficult in any way, shape, or form. What becomes difficult is the timing. You know, simple timings can be very simple. You have like a 4/4 timing, and this is a whole note. So you're going to have like 4 beats in that measure. You know, this is a measure from one bar to the next, and it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that's very simple when you got one whole note that's going to be, 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. That one note's going to last all 4 of those beats, or a half note that's going to last, that's going to last 2 of those. So it's going to last 1, 2 of those, and then you've got a 2 beat rest. That concept is very simple to understand. It can get very difficult when you're dealing with things like this. You're dealing with this right here is a 30-second note. When you're dealing with 30-second note and it's in the middle of this measure somewhere and it's got a 30-second half note rest, or 3 30-second half note rests where you're going along at 120 beats per minute, in 4/4 or 6/8 timing, that can get more and more difficult. The concept of that is very simple, but the actual usage of it can be very difficult when you're first learning. I remember when I first started learning some timing, I still have had issues, fussing around with playing something very fast that's, got a lot of really quick rests in it, and it's doing some type of something with some other instrument that's on some other staff, and its part is holding on rests and then playing short pieces, and there's a bunch of rests between it, and trying to get that timing down in my head so I can catch it. That takes practice. There is no other way around that but just practice. Sometimes you can feel it really easily, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you will see it on the staff, and you'll see a couple 30-second notes, and you'll see you'll see yourself a couple, 16th notes and a couple 8th notes that, with different rests in between them, and catching that timing just right can be very time consuming in learning it and getting very comfortable with it. One thing I do recommend is getting something like this. I had recommended this musician software, and it's got all kinds of things you can test yourself on. And most of the real basic concepts of rhythm, and it'll actually click it out, and you'll actually have to tap in time with whatever they're trying to show you so that you can get familiar with it and comfortable with it. And I really do suggest that this piece of software doesn't cost a whole lot, and it can really help you to understand the basics pretty well and get you tapping on your keyboard, on your computer, because a lot of times it's one of the biggest tools you have for timing is your hands, or tapping things out, trying to get the tapping just right, tapping your hands together and things like that. Those are huge tools, but I definitely recommend that to help you understand that. Some of the basic concepts that we're talking about when we're dealing with it is time signature. First of all, the most common time signature is 4/4. And what does that mean? When you're dealing with the 4/4 time signature, that's going to be what? That is going to be, it's going to be 4 beats per measure, and a quarter note gets each one of those beats is the value of a quarter note. And that transcends all those time signatures. The top one's going to tell you how many beats it's going to have in that measure between the bars. The bottom one's going to tell you what note gets 1 beat. So when I say 1 beat, that there's going to be a quarter note that's going to be this note here, correct? So you're looking at the quarter note, this note, and there's going to be 4 of them in one measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, because there's 4 beats per measure, and the quarter note gets 1 beat. Its value is 1 beat of the time signature. That's a very simple concept to understand. And anytime you're looking at any kind of other time signature like 5/4, that's going to be 5 beats per measure, and it's going to be the quarter note gets 1 beat, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the next measure. And that's a very simple concept to understand, so that you can look at any one of those time signatures in your rhythm and understand that. Complex rhythms, that can change periodically throughout the score. You'd be going along and all of a sudden it's going 9/8. What happened? Or halfway through a measure, all of a sudden it's trying to mark 9/8 time signature or something, and it's changed key, and all of a sudden you got to get that worked out. Sometimes some people get very familiar with that, and they can just go through a score and just play it, just look at it and off they go. Some people can't, and that takes years of practice, and when you're learning something, to stop and go, okay, now what happened there? Now it's 9/8 time signature, that's 9 beats per measure, and the 8th note, because that's 8 on the bottom, it'll be an 8th note. So it's going to be an 8th note on the bottom, so each 8th note is what gets 1 beat. And so then you basically have to look at what's going on in the music and understand, transcribe that in your mind to what notes getting 1 beat. And then basically from that point, you have to break the notes down into what's getting a whole beat, what's getting a half beat, and things like that. That can get a little bit complicated. So for now, I really suggest you stick with 4/4 timing and very simple concepts to get familiar with it. As you get more familiar with that, and you get more and more comfortable with using this software and tapping out your timing and looking at a piece of music, practicing, downloading scores and looking at 4/4, and maybe even some fairly complicated scores that are 4/4, and being able to tap out what's happening, then you can start really getting into looking at some more complex timing, some more complex rhythms like 7/8 or something like that, and being able to look at that 8th note and understand now that gets 1 beat. So if the 8th note gets 1 beat, what does the quarter note get? So if the 8th note's getting 1 beat, what is the value of the quarter note per beat? Well, it's going to work, you have to work that out. And you have to work that out for each one of the notes, and depending on the time signature. And that can be a little complicated, so we're not going to get into that too much, because when we get towards the end of this video, we'll look at that a little bit. But basically, it's a really simple concept, and that's basically what that time signature is telling you. When you see this is going to be common time with the line through that C, which is 4/4, cut time is going to be 2/2. So it's going to be cut in half. So, and those are very simple concepts to understand. And any more options you might get that you want to create your own time signatures, and whatever type of time signature you want, you just have to understand what that means. It's 6/12 or whatever kind of thing you have. You might have 4. I don't know. I've seen some really wild ones. You'd be like, what the heck was that guy thinking? Because somehow in his mind that it seemed that putting that time signature would be cool. And sometimes it's just really erratic timings. And really simple things like time signatures will run into 3/4 and things like that. 3/4, 3 beats per measure, and the quarter note gets 1 beat per measure. It'll be 1, 2, 3, next measure, 1, 2, 3, next measure, 1, 2, 3, next measure, 1, 2, 3, and the quarter note has the value of each one of those beats. And that's very simple. That can get complicated when you start reading the music and you're going, well, now what does a half note mean? You've got this time signature on here. What is a half note value on that? Well, half of that, so you basically have to kind of work it out in your head, the math of what is the subdivision or the multiplication of that note going into that time signature. And that just takes time, and that takes practice. And it just, that's why I said one of the biggest things I recommend, going through all that can be very long, and it can be very boring. And it's a really good idea to get yourself to do some reading. I definitely look, you get on Wikipedia and look up rhythm and read about it. Read the whole thing. It's not that long, and it'll give you some direction on that, and hopefully you read it a couple times, that you'll have a lot better understanding of what's happening there, and get this software and start practicing. It'll start laying all those things out for you and answer most of those questions also. And you can Google most anything else if you run any other type of issue. Be like, well, what do I do there? But the basic concept's very simple. It's just the timing notated, so that whenever you're looking at a score and you're seeing whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes, 64th notes, things like that, they'll go up and up and up to where you're looking at notes like this here, or notes that's 64th, there's 128th, there's a 256th note. The chances of you running into too many 256 notes and actually using them until you're pretty good at doing what you're doing aren't very good anyway. So, and trying to you understand that concept, that type of speed happening in a piece of work, that the timing of that, unless it's very straightforward in a long run, if there's a lot of breaks in there, that the timing can be very complex. You trying to figure out how to tap a 256 note, and you're going, well, dang, I mean, that's like flying. Yeah, that's flying. And a very fast calculation in your mind, and working it out slowly at first, going through it and figuring out what the timing is of any run or any measure, and working it out very slowly, and then speeding up little by little. The better you get at it is normally the best way to do it. That way you'd go really slow and very slowly tap it out with your foot while you're playing it on your keyboard or on your instrument, and working through it very slowly, and then slowly building up speed and building up speed and building up speed. That way that you can get a little bit better understanding of it, and your form is better. Because if you try to practice those, even like these notes here, some of those are pretty fast, and you just trying to automatically just play that fast, it might not go that way. You might want to slow way down and just practice doing those rhythms. And that's where the software comes in handy, that you can practice all those rhythms and tapping it on your keyboard, and really practice getting familiar with that. So that as you get familiar with that and you start actually working with pieces of work, that you become very familiar with what's happening there. Give me 1 second, and we're going to take a little bit closer look at some subdivisions of the notes. Okay, so when we're talking about subdivision, how do we look at that? Let's say we've got the whole note. So when we've got the whole note, half the whole note is going to be the half note. Then half of that is going to be the quarter note. Half of that is going to be the eighth note. Half of that is going to be the 16th note. Half of that is going to be the 32nd note. So that is a very simple concept to understand. So that when you're looking at this quarter note here, and you can see there's a quarter note, then there is a quarter note rest, and then there is a half note rest. Because you would have one quarter note, another quarter note, and a half note would be this note there. Does that make sense? Would fit in there. Now you could have some eighth note rest, because when you're the basic rests on there, you have, when you're looking at the rests, you've got a whole, this is a whole rest, a whole note rest. This is a half note rest with it laying on top of it. This is a quarter note rest. This is an eighth note rest. This is a 16th note rest, and this is a 32nd note rest. You can tell by the flags on the number on there, and you get familiar with those basic ones. When it gets to be way more than that, it's getting a little more complicated, and I'm not going to get into the 256 notes right now in the subdivisions of them, but that's the basic concept. So when you're looking at time signature, what is that going to mean? I mean, when I'm looking at basic time signatures, that the concept of it is it's half. So half or doubled, so anytime you're dealing with that, even something like 3/4, you've got 3 notes per the beat. So if a quarter note gets a whole beat, what is a half a note going to be? Well, a half note's going to be a beat and a half, correct? And a whole note's going to be 3 beats, correct? So you could have a whole note on 3/4 timing, that if it's had the 3/4 time signature, that whole note is going to get 3 beats. This half note's going to get a beat and a half, and then this is going to be a whole beat. So then what's half of that? Does that make sense? And what's half of that, and what's half of that? Or doubled, or double, does that make sense? Half of that, or going backwards and doubling that. So if you're looking at a time signature that has something like, you're looking at, if it's doubled, you've got like, let's say you've got 4/8 or something like that. Let's say you got 4/8 time signature, to where it's like, you know, you've got 4 beats per measure, but the eighth note's getting 1 beat. So you have to kind of figure out what the doubles of that and what the halves of that, to be able to quickly understand what the rhythmic value is in that time signature with the notes and the type of notes that are being used. And that sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It's very simple. If you just sit down, maybe watch that part that we just talked about again a couple times and a few times, and practice doing that, looking at the different time signatures and going it through it in your head and figuring out what is the beats per measure, how many beats are going to be in that measure, what is the bottom number, what note gets 1 beat, and then just start subdividing and multiplying so that you can figure out what notes have half that value, what is half that value. You know, is it a beat and a half? Is it 2 beats? Is it, 3 beats? Depending on what the top number is and what the bottom number is, how you subdivide it and multiply it. And it's very simple. That concept is that simple. And I'm not going to sit here and go into a whole bunch of different time signatures and what that would be, because the more complicated you make it in your mind, the more complicated it gets. So you want to keep that concept of division and multiplying, what is half of that, what is double that, and keep that in line. Very simple concepts. The other concept is you have things like this, where this is going to have a dot on it. Now the dot is going to add half of the value of that. So if you see like a quarter note here with a dot on it, it's going to be that whole beat plus half that value. So basically you would have this note plus half its value, because there would be a dot after it. So then you would have what? You'd have 1/8 note rest here before this half note rest, correct? Because basically this would last for a beat and a half. And so a beat and a half would make a half a beat, and this would be an eighth note, correct? So you'd have this whole note or quarter note, you'd have the dot next to it. So you'd have, this would be gone, and you'd have 1/8 note rest there, and then the half note rest after that. And that's a very simple concept to understand. Those concepts don't get very much more complicated than that. That very simple concept of that rhythmic value, that those concepts are very simple. So I mean, it doesn't take much for you to sit down. Familiarizing yourself with that can be the time consuming part. And when you get into here and you start looking at some of these subdivisions of what that is, you can get into the software and it'll start telling you what the asking you what the rhythmic value is of it and things like that, so you can start trying to understand and actually tap it out and review and familiarize yourself with that kind of stuff. And different kinds of tapping. I mean, it's got lots of things. It'll start a thing here, and it's got a metronome going in the background, and then you got to tap this out. You've got these quarter notes with the dot on it, so you know what that is. You understand the time signature. Then you've sat down and worked out what that means, what the value of those notes. The eighth note's going to get 1 beat. So if the eighth note's going to get 1 beat, double that is going to be the quarter note, correct? So double that, it's going to be twice as much. So that's a very simple concept to understand. And those kind of things, then you can work your way through that little by little and get yourself more familiar with it, because doing the math in your head before you do any one of those, and if you run into issues where it's just not quite working that way for some reason, you're like, well, no, I've subdivided that and multiplied it, and then, well, heck, maybe there's some algebra involved here or something, and it's like, well, normally it doesn't get that complicated. It's that simple to where you just start subdividing it and multiplying it. And, you understand when you see those dots, what that's going to do to that. What the value is going to be there, how it's going to multiply another half again. If you've got a half note here and you've got that dot on it, well, what's it going to be? It's going to be, instead of 2 beats, it's going to be 3 beats in 4/4. So you'd have, this would actually last 3 beats, and then you'd have 1/4 note rest here instead of a half note rest. And it basically just works that simple. Most of the basic rhythm concepts that you're going to want to focus on, first of all, are that simple. Whenever it starts trying to change, if you come through here and all of a sudden it's got like, well, now it just changed to 3/4 in the middle of this measure or on the next measure, then you understand. It'll change back and it'll show you somewhere along here. I go, all right, back here, it went back to the original, time signature. And just keep an eye out and look through the score really well to catch that kind of stuff so that you can change. It sounds simple, but going from 4/4, even with very simple concepts of going from 4/4 to 3/4, there's been some times where I'll be playing along and all of a sudden I'll be like, whoa, bro, just changed to 3/4, and I'm trying to figure out the math in my head looking at something, and it just takes practice. I don't do a lot of sight reading. I played at church for a while. I don't like it. It's some people really get into it, and to me, I'm not as much into it. I do a lot of composing and writing music, and I do not spend a whole lot of time sight reading. I just don't. And, that's not the kind of thing I wanted to do with music anyway, so I don't really do that. I mean, I understand music, but I don't sit around doing a lot of sight reading. I just don't. So, but those concepts for rhythm are very simple, and it may look complicated, but your biggest tool and your biggest friend is your hands and your clapper, and you sit there and work out the rhythm, so that you can sit there and take scores and work out the rhythms, look at scores, trying to find simple time signatures first of all, like 4/4 or 3/4, and work out the taps, tap it out, what's going on there to get familiar with it. And then start trying to do it on your instrument, and it's that simple. We talked about it in the previous series of the basics of rhythm and things like that, the basics of rhythm, timing, and things like that. And we went through it pretty well, but now you can see it on the staff. But one thing I don't know if I recommended this, but I definitely recommend this to help you. And this is a really huge tool, because the cool thing about, on the keyboard, you can see your notes, and you can see the notes on the staff. And as you get more familiar with the notes on the staff and the scales and the keys and how a chord is constructed that we've talked about, and how melody is, and while the melodies are going, and being able to look at one staff and another staff and seeing they're two different notes, but they're being played at the same moment in time, because now you understand time, that at the beginning of this measure there's the 8th note, and at the beginning of this measure down here it's the flute and it's the violin, and at that same note they're playing some type of harmony. And we've talked about harmonies. You should be able to quickly see that from watching the videos that we've already done. And now the timing thing really helps you with that. Not only helps you with your rhythm, but being able to help you structure your harmonies in time, in space, because basically the whole concept of the rhythm on the staff is the notes we've talked about, the chords, the keys, the melodies, and all that, so that they have a space in time, that they're not just happening randomly. Those notes just ain't flying off all anywhere in the wind. They have a very specific place in time that they happen, and that's the whole basic concept. And the other concepts you have with timing can be very complicated, as far as like things like beats per minute. Beats per minute, can get kind of complicated when you start looking at notations, and you start looking at things like, it's allegro or it's andante or something like that. When you see that kind of stuff, those concepts, some of them you get in your notation software and you get on the internet and look around on it, then it'll explain to you that that's kind of slow largo, or andante, or, depending on where what kind of speed it is. But that can all depend on who is conducting also and who wrote it. What do they think Largo is? I mean, do they think Largo is, 60 beats per minute or 80 beats per minute? Well, where is their mindset at? How fast do they think that is? And a lot of that is for very accomplished composers and people that are very familiar with working with classical music, and those time signatures have a really good understanding that that's about 55 beats per minute. But they got a really good understanding from working with it a lot. And that you can come back to beats per minute, and that's how many beats per minute. So you have how many beats are going to be per minute, and that's very simple. You're talking about 4 beats per measure. How many beats per minute? And that breaks it down to where you can very easily, you can even download on the internet on your phone. I have one here that I use all the time that's just basically for, doing tempo. And it's, it's very simple. It's called Mobile Metronome, and you can see it there. And I can just about put any time signature I want on there, beats per minute. So I can tap it out or whatever. I can sit here and tap it, and tap whatever tempo I want, however fast I want it, and it'll play it however fast I want it, and I can look at it. And that can help you to get more familiar with the tapping and the times, because that is basically setting a foundation. The very foundation of it being in time. This can be a quarter note, but that doesn't mean nothing if there's no underlying foundation. If there's not, 50, 60, 100, 120 beats a minute, if there's not some foundation of how many, in time, where that thing can land, then that doesn't mean anything. The first foundation of that is how many beats per minute, or the Largo, Andante, the markings that you'll most of the time see up here on the staff. But you can get on the internet and download some things that give you a basic understanding. Largo, they normally mean this many beats per minute and things like that. I don't use that a lot. I really don't. When I'm looking at something, I know something's slow or it's medium or it's kind of fast. And I don't worry about that too much unless I'm being really strict. Because I've ran a whole lot of times that it varies sometimes. You'd be like, well, that's not what Bob said, bro. What does that mean? So, if it's got beats per minute, I know exactly what that means. If it says 80 beats per minute, I know that means exactly 80 beats per minute. There's no guessing in any way, shape, or form. And then that foundation, these are built from. That way that I know that's 80 beats per minute, and there's going to be 80 of those happening in a minute. But very simple. So I know the exact flow of the piece of music. And now, once I understand that, I can start putting notes in time so that they happen at certain times throughout, the score. And that's it. That concept's very simple to understand. And again, you will run into that here also. Sometimes some things you'll run into, like ties. Ties will be one thing where you don't strike the note again, where there'll be a tie here that's, there'll be two notes here that are the same note or of different note values, and they'll have a tie attaching them. So you have something coming up that's attaching them actually to where you're going, well, what does that mean? It means there'll be a connection, that there'll be a line that's going like here. Well, like, let's see, where's it at? Let's see, a tie. I've got one here somewhere. Trying to find a tie. A basic tie that's going to tie. Why does I don't have one on there? Right here. So if I go to there and I tap that on there, you can see that that's the basic tie. And that would normally attach it to another note. You'd highlight both of them, or highlight this one or the one after it, and then push your tie button, or you can mark it. That's meaning that if this note's sitting here and you've got this note right next to it and you've got a tie on it, that means you'd hit the note at this moment in time, but you would basically let it ring out. It would last as long as those two notes combined. Is that you wouldn't hit it when you seen this note attached to this one, you wouldn't hit it again when you seen that note. It would just continue that length. The duration of those two notes would basically become one, and their duration and time would be a combined value of both of them. And that's very simple concept to understand. And that's about it when you're getting into timing, those basic concepts that you just need to spend time with. and working with it. And the best way to do it is to write some things out and, and practice using that in different time signatures. Work on basically, I suggest you work with 4/4 and 3/4 and working that out, spending some time with those and getting familiar with those. And I suggest you buy something like this to work it out. If you can't, there is plenty of stuff on the internet to download practicing your timing, and there's things all over the internet. Just be careful. One of the things why I recommend a piece of software like this is because it can be used at universities and things like that, and it doesn't cost that much. You don't know who you're getting information from on the internet. There's been times where I'd be saying something and it'd be like somebody will call me up and they'll be, bro, I just watched your video and that's, you said that's that. And I'll be like, what? Wait a minute, hold on a minute, bro. So I'll go back, go, oh man, I got cruising along and didn't state that, well enough, or I made some type of mistake, which doesn't happen very often, but there has been an occasion of it. So anyway, the concept of that is very simple. And if you can understand what we've talked about so far, that you can basically understand the foundation, which is going to be beats per minute, how many beats per minute, then you're going to understand that's the underlying foundation, that you use these values, these note values and these rests to build, to put the notes that we've talked about somewhere in space and time, so that they have a place in space and time to happen. And it's that simple. Things like the dot and things like the tie are two tools to help you do that. And when you're looking at scores, be real careful of that, because if you really want to keep an eye out for ties, make sure they're not slurs, sliding somewhere, or doing some other type of articulation that you're fairly certain that it's a tie. I've run into composition and be like, I don't know if that's a slur or a tie or what that is, because sometimes you'll have a slur, or you'll have something that it'll be attaching something like this that means to flow. They want it to flow. And I've watched some notation and go, it look like a tie, but I'm not sure. The markings look like they want you to just kind of flow with it. It's not trying to tie those notes together. They're different notes. So obviously it's not one value for all those different notes, because it's changing note. If this was this note here and the next this was tied to a different note, it's going to have to change somewhere, unless you're sliding or bending or something like that. So the value of there would have to be some type of articulation happening there for you to change tone. Does that make to change from one note to another? So, keep a really close eye out on that. If they're changing notes, obviously it's either meaning flow, or it's a slur, or it's some other type of articulation, a bend, or some type of other, could be a wind instrument and some type of articulation they're using on the wind instrument that's changing from one tone to another, that they're trying to describe with some type of notation that they didn't notate very well, or you're not familiar with, and you'd be like, what the hell is that? And that takes time. So watch out for those types of things. So basically at this point, you can understand about beams. Beams would be very simple. You can see the beams, the flags on the top of here, and beams will just be connecting those. Some types of beams that they'll be connecting. Be real careful when you see beams, that the beam's going from here and it's 8th note and it's going to this 16th note, and halfway between it the beam is changed. Don't try not to get confused by that, and pay more attention to the note value. And just understand that the beams a lot of times are put there just to connect it together, so as you go along you can see there's not a lot of changes happening and things like that, that those notes are going to be of the same value or something like that happening, so that you don't have to spend as much time. It's a quick reference kind of tool. And rather than them all just being separate, with little flags all replaced with the same value, they'll use beams to tie them together. So that's another very simple concept to understand. So now that you understand that and the very basic concepts of what those note values are, how they're derived, how you have a beats per minute foundation to work from so that they have a place in time. We're not talking right now about complex rhythms, what that could be. We'll get into that later, because it really doesn't matter whether I'm playing jazz or some kind of African music or some kind of reggae music or some kind of rock song or some pop song or anything else. None of those kind of rhythm values or different type of rhythms should have anything to do with those basic concepts. Those basic concepts are going to remain constant as a foundation of whatever type of music you're working on. So those basic concepts are going to transcend those genders and whatever type of music you might be working in or whatever type of rhythms you might be working in. You know, and try to keep that simple concept in your head, so you don't have to think it's something different because I'm playing this reggae song or this African rhythm or, you know, some other, some really exotic rhythm that's got this really, very unique sound, and you're like, well, that's got to be look different on the staff, no, you have to work that out, and it's going to get worked out with the basic foundations we've talked about. One way or another, it's going to work out onto the staff with those basic foundations. And it works that simply. So try to keep it that simple in your head. Work out the math when you're running into those things, because you're going to have to. And I talk about that stuff a lot longer, but it's a really good idea for you to go through there. Think about the concepts that I've talked about. And if anything, you didn't catch it, go back and watch those other videos at the beginning of this channel about the basics of rhythm and timing. And if you're still not catching some things, get on the internet and Google it. I think by the time you get done watching these and you went back and watched those other videos and you've started practicing this, that as you progress, as you start to get a little bit more familiar with the timings, that some of those things become very apparent. And also that as you go along and go through it, that any questions you come along with, different types of time signatures and timings, and look at the note value. And what does that mean? Well, that note, you've got some strange time signature over here, and this note here is got, a dot on it and a tie, and you're trying to figure out what is that, and it's like, well, at first you might really be spending some time trying to subdivide that or multiply it and connect those, so that they're, the values of them, and to try to figure out exactly what that means. How long does that note last? Where does that note start in time? Where does that note end in time? Are your two biggest things you want to work about. Those are the two concepts that are going to be the most important concepts for you get in your head. Where does that note happen in time, and where does that note stop in time? And it's that simple. And once you start getting more and more familiar with that, it'll become easier and easier. I learned that there was some things, I got into some things, and even 30-second notes, I'd be trying to do some timing, trying to figure out where that note happens in time and where it ends, and where the other note begins, and where the rest begins, and where that ends, and where the other next note begins, and that takes time, because I found myself sitting around on bandwidth trying to figure out exactly where the heck that thing was at, so I could play it. And that can be very complicated. So you really want to slow it down, slow it way down until you can really do it well, very slowly, and then slowly build up your speed. So that, a really good thing is if you have a DAW or something, a metronome is really good to have. Like I said, you can download it on your phone or your iPad or anything like that, and even on your computer or your notation software should have a metronome in it somewhere. And that's very simple to help you just practice in timing. So I hope now that when you look at the notes on the staff, you're looking at beats per minute, you very simply understand what that means, how many beats per minute. And you're going to figure out how many beats per minute is very simple. How many beats? One, two, it's going to be 120 of those. It'll be marked up here, 120 BPM. And what note gets one beat is going to be this bottom number. What note? So that's going to be quarter note. So there's going to be 120 of those per minute, and there's going to be 4 beats per measure between this line and this line. And from there, you have some subdividing and some multiplying to work out what these note values are. If you have a dot, that's going to be half again as much as the original value of the note. if you have a tie, that's going to tie the values of the two notes that are tied together into one value, so that it's, you know, they're combined into a set amount of time and space. And it's that simple to understand. And now it just takes practice. And so you need to take those concepts, you need to get out the staff paper, you need to get out your best tool, and you need to work out some timing. And, you know, I mean, a lot of times that, you know, like I said, the notation software is very helpful to help you get started with it, so that you can start to familiarize yourself with some of the basic rhythms and the basic time signatures, the basic values that are happening, and work through those so that you can become more and more familiar with them. The more familiar you become with the basics, like 4/4 and 3/4, and the note values, and being able to do it slow and fast, that the other time signatures, that the multiplying, dividing, once you start doing it and you're looking at a complex time signature that's like 6/8 or something, working out what those note values are, you know, you're going to have 6 beats per measure, and the 8th note's going to get 1 beat. That means the 8th note, it has the value. So you have, you know, 1/8 note, 1/8 note, 1/8 note, 1/8 note, 1/8 note, 1/8 note for that measure. And then everything else is going to be divided in half or multiplied, you know, double that, half of it or double it. You know, and that's very simple unless you start working with the, you know, you start adding dots to it or ties and things like that, and figuring out what those values mean. And it's very simple. The concept is not that hard. And with that understanding, it will be very, once you get more familiar with that, working out complex rhythms, if you hear some very exotic rhythm or some very exotic timing, that the more familiar with the basics of it you get, the easier that's going to be for you to work out, to where when you're going along, you're going, well, what exactly is that time signature going to be? How am I, you know, how does that feel? You know, and it'll become easier and easier and easier the more you familiarize with that, and the more you download scores and get out your tool and figure out what's going on there. Get out your metronome and start your metronome, you know, and all, yeah, and you know, work out what's happening there. Or working with your software and to you know, get familiar with it. But those are the basic concepts you need to work on and to understand. And from what we've talked about there, that most of the complex things you may be able to run into will be very easy for you to figure out and work out the math of what's supposed to be happening. And it's not a lot of math, and it's not really complicated. It's not like you have to learn trigonometry and some really strange algebra or something to try to figure out what the note value is. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you have a little bit better understanding of looking at basic rhythms, what sets it in time, the beats per minute, so that it has, you know, a set space in time, and so that you can start placing these values and the rests and the notes and the dots and the ties to have your notes have somewhere in space and time to be. Peace, hope, love. See you in the next video.